Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of December the 14th and 15th, 2024. So the big event, I suppose, this weekend is a full moon in Gemini. And I will be focusing on this full moon, considering, what it might mean, perhaps what parts of the world it might impact, trying to think perhaps of any famous people who might be influenced by it. I mean, I can only come up with one who really sticks to mind, and that's Annalena Baerbock, who's the German foreign minister. So maybe I'll be looking at her chart. I'm sure there are others, but she's the one that I might focus on a little bit. But before I look at this full moon, I want to look at the weekend in terms of its astrology and the I Ching. So as always, if you enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed and you enjoy this video, I'd be really happy if you were to subscribe, because it doesn't cost you anything and it does make a difference to the channel. So let's look at what's happening this weekend. So here's a chart of the weekend set for New York as usual. Noon New York. The middle of the weekend, midnight on Sunday, December the 15th. And so the moon is in Gemini. So it is a moon in Gemini weekend. And at least for most of the weekend, right at the end of the weekend, it does go into Cancer. In fact, the moon goes into Cancer at 7:21 p.m. London time on Sunday evening. So that means sort of late morning, early afternoon in the Americas, depending on whereabouts in the Americas you are, you will experience some kind of change as the moon moves from Gemini to Cancer. But I think for most of us, we can regard it as being a moon in Gemini weekend. In fact, the moon is making a conjunction to Jupiter. And so with that Moon-Jupiter conjunction in Gemini, there is a little bit of Gemini emphasis. There is a fair amount to be said. It may not be very deep what we say, but still we've got something to communicate. And in terms of the elemental balance, we've got Moon in Gemini, Moon and Jupiter in Gemini, which is an air sign. We've also got Venus and Pluto in Aquarius. So there's a certain emphasis over the course of a weekend, so maybe that means that things won't get too intense. We can be fairly light about the way things are and the way things unfold. At least we can try. Though, when the moon does go into Cancer, it does make things, I suppose, a little more serious. I think we become more emotional. So right at the end of a weekend, or I suppose it might be into Monday if you're in Australia and New Zealand, right at the end of the weekend, things get more serious, and perhaps there's less to be said but more to be felt. So that is certainly a possibility, though the main event of the weekend is a full moon. Now at the end of the video I will be talking in detail about this full moon, but we have full moon in Gemini. So we've got moon in Gemini, sun in Sagittarius. So they're obviously, by definition, a full moon is an opposition. Moon in Gemini, sun in Sagittarius. Of course, another person who's impacted by this full moon, I mentioned Annalena Baerbock, is of course Donald Trump, because Donald Trump has the opposite. He's got sun in Gemini, moon in Sagittarius. So I think with this full moon, it's perhaps a time when we see the implications of everything that has happened. Whatever we've done, we can see, whether or not that was really a good thing. Was it a good thing? We think of the fall of Damascus, which happened at happened at the beginning of this lunar cycle, and now this lunar cycle has peaked. I was just reading in the news that one of the Kurdish opposition groups in Syria has had to tone down its fight against ISIS because it's having to deal with Turkish-backed rebels. So I suppose Syria is starting to unfold. So that may be now people are starting to see what has been unleashed in Syria. And there may be other things in our lives, in our personal lives with full moon. We've started to understand things, and with the full moon, perhaps the truth is in front of us. And of course, Moon in Gemini, Sun in Sagittarius, in a way that is about the truth, isn't it? Moon in Gemini likes to be communicative, and Sun in Gemini is really into the truth, finding the truth. And I suppose with the full moon, you could argue that the Moon in Gemini is trying to talk to avoid the issue. Perhaps Sun in Gemini is perhaps Sun in Sagittarius is the issue, and there's Moon in Gemini trying its hardest to avoid things. But I'll be looking at this full moon in greater detail at the end of this video. And anything else? Sun is making a quincunx to Uranus. I mean, it's very much tied in with the full moon. Again, so the Uranus influence on that full moon matters. But Sun quincunx Uranus, I suppose it's about us trying to deal with change and finding change a little bit uneasy. It's difficult to work it out, and it's certainly a challenge. But that is connected with a full moon, and I'll be talking about that Uranus influence again later in the video. Now that's the positions of the planets midnight on Sunday the 15th, New York time. If you're in Sydney, Australia, the middle of midnight on Sunday the 15th, the moon is a little bit earlier. Its moon is at 11 degrees Gemini. So moon at 11 degrees Gemini is starting to make a conjunction to Jupiter. So the middle of a weekend, there is that real sort of moon-Jupiter influence. I don't know, late on Saturday night if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but I don't think there's a huge difference between the Americas and Sydney, Australia, particularly if we're looking at the weekend as a whole, because normally I look at what's going on a day-to-day basis, so the differences between Australasia and America become more pronounced. When we're looking at a sort of a 2-day period, it's kind of a bit more averaged out. Turning to the heliocentric picture, in other words, looking at things from a perspective of the Earth, putting the Earth at the center of everything. So here we have it. There's the heliocentric picture for the weekend, and we've got Earth sextile Venus. We had Earth sextile Venus has been forming for a couple of days. Now it's exact. So with Earth sextile Venus, I mean, I would have said that that's quite a mild influence. I don't think it's anything particularly dramatic, and it may be a weekend when we can, if we make the effort, get on with people. And so I don't know if there have been any recent disagreements. That Earth sextile Venus may provide an opportunity to perhaps smooth things over. And that's probably the main thing to report. There has been a sort of a Mars semi-square Uranus. You can see that Mars and Uranus are in 45-degree aspect. I mean, that is a fairly violent combination, Mars semi-square Uranus. I don't know if we felt it much as the week progressed, just before the weekend, but I would have thought that Mars semi-square Uranus is sort of past peak, so it probably isn't going to be too much of an issue this weekend. So let me now look at the weekend from the perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for this weekend, which is the weekend of December the 14th and 15th, 2024. Aries. Aries, you, in some respects, have high hopes. I mean, high hopes perhaps in quite a general sense, looking maybe at things in a way that is maybe over-optimistic. I mean, you really would like to believe that the best is possible. And this may reflect also some of your ideas, about the world and what can happen and how good things can be. And you may have certain beliefs, maybe religious beliefs, maybe spiritual beliefs, maybe political beliefs, which in a way you're quite idealistic about. But maybe you're too idealistic at the moment. Maybe you might be putting too much energy into something that, at least in the short term, doesn't really have much chance of actually being realized. So I think, Aries, it's important to be realistic. And, remember, looking at the planets today, there's nothing in Earth signs except for Uranus. And because there's nothing in Earth signs, that can encourage a certain lack of realism. And that might be something that you have to watch out for. Now, the main event this weekend is a full moon. And I think the full moon is actually providing us with a similar picture. The full moon is about what you believe in, what you'd like to happen. But the full moon, it's that stage in the cycle where the waxing moon becomes the waning moon, when the cycle reaches peak. And it is about truth, and it's about seeing things for what they really are. And, this full moon is in Gemini. So that means we've got Sun in Sagittarius, opposition Moon in Gemini. So Gemini full moon perhaps is about confronting the facts, confronting the details, and perhaps realizing that the small facts are contradicting the big picture. And what do? Now, you can discount these facts. You can say, well, it doesn't matter. And there could then be a certain sense of cognitive dissonance. You have big ideas, but the reality is contradicting it. It's like Festinger and others, wrote this book, When Prophecy Fails, and when he sort of really started to introduce this idea of cognitive dissonance, when this group, this sort of cult in the 1950s, really believed that there was going to be some kind of alien landing or intervention on Earth, and they thought it was going to be on a particular date, and it didn't happen. And they came up with all sorts of reasons why it didn't happen. Perhaps they'd been praying so hard that the catastrophe never unfolded. So that is a cognitive dissonance. And so you have to be careful yourself about cognitive dissonance. What you'd like to happen and what is happening just may be at odds with each other. So with this full moon, I think you have to, if possible, be really careful and be prepared to ask questions. And if the facts don't support your ideas, then maybe it's the ideas that change rather than to sort of dismiss the facts, or to perhaps think that you've got the facts wrong, or someone else has got the facts wrong. So I'm not saying that you should not have hopes and not be optimistic and not believe that things can happen, but at the same time you have to deal with reality. And it just may be, if one's trying to be optimistic, that something you really wanted to happen can be achieved, but you've got to take a different approach, or maybe you've got to work harder, or you've got to ask more questions, or you just got to do some fine-tuning. So that may be something about how this weekend is going to unfold. And I shouldn't forget, on a positive note, that the moon is sextile Mars on Saturday. So on Saturday with moon sextile Mars, there is a lot you can do, and it's a time when you can ask questions, and you can perhaps take something that is maybe a little bit unclear and put energy into making it real. But you have to make the effort, and perhaps that's part of what this weekend is about. Taurus, we have a full moon this weekend, and this full moon is across the financial axis of your chart, and it may be that financial matters can't be entirely discounted. I mean, you might like to discount them, but reality is, I think, that money does matter. The material dimension does matter. And when you actually think about it, things are all a little bit disconnected in a material sense. I mean, part of that is because, with the moon moving out of Taurus recently, there's nothing in earth signs. And Taurus, you're an earth sign. You like there to be things in earth signs, but there is nothing there. And so with nothing in earth signs, there's a disconnection. It may be just difficult to connect with financial realities, so you have to perhaps make a special effort. But at the same time, you don't want to overcompensate. So it may be a weekend where you try your hardest to actually avoid financial issues, even though privately they're really important. And so I don't think you want to do any avoiding, especially when there's a full moon. And a full moon is going to reveal a few truths about your finances. I mean, not necessarily in a bad sense. It could be that you'll start to see that your finances are not as bad as you thought, or there may be opportunities. But it is asking you to just look at what you have and what you don't have, and to be absolutely honest about it. Now, this full moon is not just about money. It's also about the way you handle your emotions. Because in astrology, sort of money and emotions are often sort of close together. I mean, it's in astrology, for example, there's this thing called the eighth house. The eighth house, which of course in the Taurus chart is Sagittarius, the eighth sign from Taurus. And the eighth sign in astrology, it's about emotion. It's about deeper emotion. It's about sexuality. It's about passion. It's about death. It's about legacies. It's about money. So it's all sort of links together, doesn't it? And so the full moon may give you a sense of your own emotions and your own emotional states. And I think the challenge is that if you feel really tense and uptight about something, you somehow have to bring these feelings down to earth. Yeah, it could be difficult bringing feelings down to earth when you've only got Uranus in an earth sign, but I think that is something that you perhaps can do. And the question is, how would you do it? And how would you get real? And it may be with the moon in Gemini, Taurus, there are certain things that have to be talked about, or maybe written about. The moon in Gemini is very communicative. It is about the spoken or the written word. And by writing something or saying it, you're making something less complicated, and you're also making it in a way more available. And what you don't want to do is make things unnecessarily complicated, because there is a quincunx aspect between the Sun and Uranus. Remember, Uranus is in Taurus, and that Uranus in Taurus could actually make things difficult through your own actions. It may be actually this weekend could be very simple if you were just to follow the plan and not do anything complicated. But you might decide to do something very individual, which is very much about you, and you do it, and then you realize that you've made things, you have made things a lot more complicated. So perhaps, Taurus, this weekend it's going to be very important that you make a special effort to keep things simple, and that might be enough. And as far as other people is concerned, I think other people can be a plus in your life, and other people can perhaps show you a different vision. And in terms of your choices about who you mix with over the course of a weekend, mix with people who are happy, confident, larger than life people. And don't feel that you have to do things your way. See where other people want to take you, and just perhaps be inspired by their enthusiasm, because it is a weekend where you can meet fun people. It really is, and that perhaps provides a balance to sort of everything I was saying about the full moon. Perhaps the full moon being somewhat complicated and having issues about money. So. Do try to get that balance, Taurus. Gemini. There's a full moon. The full moon affects all of us, but I think it could affect Gemini as a sign perhaps more than other signs, and that's because the moon is in Gemini. And every year there is going to be a Gemini full moon, and this Gemini full moon, very much is about you and your influence, and perhaps it's a situation where things might have been running against you a little recently, running against you in the sense that events out of your hands may have been perhaps gaining momentum, and you weren't fully in control. And with this full moon, you start to see the picture. You start to understand what the limits of your control are, and perhaps also what you might be able to do about it. And it could be, this full moon, about putting your foot down. And the reason you put your foot down is because you start to see things clearly. And that is the difference between Sagittarius and Gemini, because obviously a full moon in Gemini means you've got Sun in Sagittarius, moon in Gemini. Sun in Sagittarius could just be going with the flow, going with the excitement. When I say flow, I don't mean flow as in water, I mean flow as in fire. Fire is moving, being part of all of this energy flying around, and it just seems just easiest to become part of it and being looking for excitement. And then with that full moon, you're suddenly asking questions. And you can see the conflicts, you can see the disagreements, you can see why things might not work, and reality hits. And that's kind of how it often works with Gemini. Gemini is happy-go-lucky, thinking it's all fine. Then Gemini thinks and thinks and thinks, and then suddenly something changes. It suddenly becomes absolutely clear, and the facts haven't changed, but somehow you have changed. You see it, and so with that full moon, it's clear that something has happened. Now, one event happening over the weekend which I didn't mention, a major omission on my part is the fact that Mercury is going stationary direct. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? I mean, that is one of the big events this weekend. Mercury going stationary direct. And of course, Mercury is your ruler. And for the last 3 weeks, Mercury has been going retrograde. And that might have been having a big impact on Geminis. Things might have been difficult to get together. You know, you've been trying, but it just hasn't worked out. I mean, there's a saga of my computer. I mean, for example, me being a sun in Gemini, you know, this computer, this fan won't shut up. And I've got a new computer. Well, it's a newish computer. I bought a monitor. It's all ready to go. But the monitor's still in its box. And I should be working on a new computer, but I'm not. Well, I suppose perhaps that's because Mercury's been retrograde, and maybe I did the right thing. And of course, it's often said with Mercury retrograde that you shouldn't start things with Mercury retrograde. You maybe shouldn't turn the on button on new electronic equipment until Mercury goes direct. Anyway, Mercury does go direct this weekend. To be precise, it goes direct at 3 minutes to 9 in the evening on Sunday, London time. So that's Monday if you're in Australasia. So although Mercury is going direct this weekend, it really happened at the end of a weekend. And so perhaps we should regard Monday as the day that Mercury really is going direct. You know, new week, but it's still, I think that Mercury, even if it's technically going backwards for most of the weekend, it is stationary. And as it's stationary direct, I think it's a fortunate time for you, Gemini, where things are finally starting to move. And move not just in terms of yourself, but also in terms of other people. People are becoming clearer. And yeah, with this full moon, you're starting to understand people. And Mercury direct kind of emphasizes what the full moon is telling you. And so, overall, Gemini, I think it's just a weekend for being in control. And I think that the moon in Gemini, the full moon in Gemini, is perhaps going to indicate what you've got wrong in the past and how you can put it right. Cancer. So this weekend we have a full moon, and full moons are important, especially if you're a Cancerian. And with this Cancerian full moon, you're sensitive to it in a general sense. I mean, Cancerians are fairly sensitive to the lunar cycle. And, the full moon, we move from a waxing moon to a waning moon, and you can feel that something has changed. Also, by the way, Mercury is about to go stationary direct. Right at the end of a weekend, Mercury starts going direct, and so you can feel that flux, and it's about your sensitivity, and you're just sensitive for what's going on around you, and you can feel other people changing. And so it may not be that you actually are changing. It's just, to an extent, you're like the thermometer. You're picking up on the temperature, and it's maybe there's like a sudden fall in temperature, or like the pressure, a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure, or a sudden rise in atmospheric pressure. You get it all. And in some respects, it might be a little bit disconcerting, because, we have the moon making a square to Saturn and a conjunction to Jupiter over the weekend. And so, that puts you in a state of mind which is somewhat sort of mixed. Moon conjunct Jupiter, you can see the possibilities. You see the opportunities. Moon square Saturn, you're just aware of everything that might be holding you back, And so what do you do? Now, the moon square Saturn happens before the moon conjunct Jupiter. And that's probably a good thing. So Cancer, there might be a feeling like to begin with that really things aren't moving, that things are just stuck, moon square Saturn, and there's nothing that can be done. And then you look at things again, you get a new perspective, and then the moon moves on to a conjunction of Jupiter, and you realize that things aren't actually as bad as they seem, and actually there is a way forward. So Cancer, over the weekend, don't get too caught up in first impressions, particularly if those first impressions are negative. So you feel a situation unfolding, you think it's bad, you think that it doesn't run in your favour, but you wait, you reconsider, you look at it again, and you realise, hold on, this actually isn't so bad. So first impressions may not actually be the right impressions. Now, one thing that is happening this weekend, aside from a full moon and Mercury going stationary direct, is actually the fact that the moon moves into your sign. Now, moon moves into your sign on Sunday at 7:21 p.m. London time. So that is going to be 4:21. Let's get that right. Let me get this right. That's 7:21, 2:21. So that's going to be 2:21 in the afternoon on Sunday, East Coast, New York, and that would be 11:21 in the morning on Sunday, West Coast. So if you're an American Cancerian, then over the course of Sunday, you will experience a change as the moon moves from Gemini to Cancer. I think that this change is entirely positive because, obviously Cancer is your sign. So moon moving into Cancer, moon moves into its own sign because moon rules Cancer. So perhaps that gives further support for what I was saying about things perhaps starting off badly and ending up well. Suddenly things come together for you. So if a weekend seems problematic, if you feel that you don't want to involve yourself with anything, then just be patient. Once the moon moves into Cancer, things will start really I won't say moving because it's moon in Cancer, not a more sort of fiery dynamic sign, but it's just you're going to feel better and you're going to feel that you're able to really start to take control of things. Now, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, moon won't move into Cancer until Monday, so that arguably is something to look forward to. So you got the message, Cancer. It gets better. And so, don't jump to conclusions, especially if those conclusions are negative, because, things are getting better, and really start to focus on the positive. It might seem a waste of time focusing on the positive to begin with, but if you keep focusing, things will change and you'll realize actually that things aren't so bad. Leo, it's a weekend when you might want to be fairly sociable. I mean, why not? It's a weekend. I suppose it's coming up for Christmas. I suppose people go to Christmas parties. People like to meet over Christmas. It's not the last weekend of Christmas, so is it? Or is it? No, not quite. Sorry, not the last weekend before Christmas. I think we've got one more weekend. One more weekend before Christmas. That's true, but still, in the run up to Christmas, with the moon in Gemini, moon making a conjunction to Jupiter, there is a certain sense of, I won't say joy, that's a bit of an exaggeration maybe, but I think that in a social situation you can really come into your own, you can be yourself, and if there have been any recent sort of concerns, sort of obstacles, something holding you back, then perhaps you have a chance to really address them, and perhaps in a way sort of break free. And also this weekend we have a full moon. You've got Sun in Sagittarius, Moon in Gemini, and this full moon may be somewhat challenging. I think with this full moon, there's perhaps been a tendency to just be focusing on yourself and what you can do and your own individual creativity perhaps, and maybe you haven't given enough consideration to other people's role, and you might have been a little bit too selfish maybe, or self-obsessed. And I think the full moon is encouraging you to see things in a different way, and a way in which you can be perhaps more cooperative and benefit perhaps from cooperation from other people. So perhaps something that you thought was very personal to you may not be as personal as you thought it was, or it shouldn't be as personal as you thought it was. That maybe here we've got a situation where you can actually cooperate with other people. You can benefit from their presence, you can benefit from their input, and it's just important that you give them the chance. And perhaps in the process you'll actually learn some stuff, learn some new tricks, especially as Mercury is coming to a standstill. It's going stationary direct. Mercury has been retrograde for the last 3 weeks. It's now coming to a standstill. And so with Mercury coming to a standstill, which I think it is a fortunate event, it's not going backwards anymore, and you perhaps are able to see yourself in a new light, and also what you can do in a new light, because that Mercury going stationary direct is trine Mars, and Mars is of course in Leo, and so it may actually be that an action that you had been postponing, which was something very important to you, you're now able to get it off the ground. And given the full moon, it just may be that it really is going to help if you can get outside cooperation. And if you actually look for cooperation, then I'm pretty confident that you can find it. The Sun is still making a semi-square to Venus, and that's because the Sun and Venus are moving at similar speeds. It is starting to break up that Sun semi-square Venus, and as I've perhaps said in an earlier video, there are two ways of looking at this Sun semi-square Venus. One way of looking at this Sun semi-square Venus is to say that there's a certain amount of estrangement between the Sun and Venus, but you and other people maybe aren't on the right wavelength, because Venus is perhaps representative of other people. Venus in Aquarius, in your opposite sign, means that you and other people just aren't seeing eye to eye, or perhaps you're not seeing eye to eye with them, but they're still in aspect with each other. That means other people can't be avoided. And so perhaps this is a situation where you actually need to really benefit from other people. And there are people out there who can really make your life better. They've got some input, they've got ideas, they've got enthusiasm. So give people a chance this weekend. It does matter. You can be a hermit if you want to be, but I wouldn't recommend that course of action. Virgo, we have in a way quite a busy weekend, in the sense that there are events that have an impact on your sign. So we have a full moon, and we've got full moon in Gemini, and that's going to have an impact on you because Gemini is an important sign for you in the Virgo chart. Gemini is a high-profile sign. It's at the top of the chart. So we've got the full moon. We've got Mercury going stationary direct, and so Mercury is your ruler. It's coming to a standstill, but now it's after 3 weeks of going backwards, perhaps 3 weeks of confusion, things are starting to really sort themselves out. So that's something you can really think about. So if there has been sort of recent confusions, particularly over the last 3 weeks, then I think that you may have a chance to resolve them. And so, looking at the full moon, moon is in Gemini, and I think that for many Virgos, they are going to want to make an impact. You're going to want to be seen. You're going to want to be heard, and I suppose you're going to be aware of everything that might be holding you back, because the moon is opposition the sun, and the sun in Sagittarius. So the sun in Sagittarius does represent something that is restricting you. It could be, for example, your family. It could be the past. It could be your emotions. You, in some respects, wanting to stay with the past, stick with the past, and not really confront the challenges of the future. That's certainly one way of looking at it. The moon, just before the full moon, we've got the moon actually makes a square to Saturn, and that square Saturn is another thing that you might think is in your way. Could be a relationship, someone just being too heavy, someone taking up too much of your time. But all of this it's unnecessary. You needn't worry about it, because the moon, certainly with the moon Saturn, the moon makes a square to Saturn. Then it makes a conjunction to Jupiter. So that moon conjunct Jupiter, which is exact on Saturday, is very positive. So I don't know what you're doing on Saturday, but it's really important in the run up to the full moon. Full moon, for most of us, is going to be on the Sunday. From the run up to the full moon, you're able to just have a real vision of what is possible, and how it might be the case that you can just break free from things holding you back. Those things holding you back might be in the real world, they might be in your mind, they might be in terms of your feelings, but you can break free. And the full moon is telling you the truth of the matter. And so with the full moon, when you look at what you want, what you're trying to achieve, there's a moment of clarity when you can actually see everything that's holding you back. I suppose it's when the tide goes out and you can see everything, and you can sort of see, the lumps of concrete, what was on the seabed, everything, but everything is real, and you see the obstacles, for what they are. But if you can see an obstacle, that's great, because if you can see an obstacle, you're going to know how to get around it, and you can perhaps start to see the process by which some of your achievements in the past, some of your goals have not been achieved, and now you can see it. You're able to take action, and you're able to move, and I think that is something very much to be welcomed. But remember, it is a full moon. It's just very important, Virgo, that you are completely honest with yourself. It's not a time for deception, and it may be that you'll realize that certain things which had been such an important part of your life recently are not necessarily serving any useful purpose anymore. They may be comfortable. You may like having them around, but perhaps they've had their day, they've had their moment, and it's perhaps time to move on, and perhaps realize that it's time to move on to the next stage. And I think you'll be helped by the fact that Mercury is going stationary direct. 3 weeks of delay, confusion, not being sure, finding it difficult to make commitments, well, that's all over. And so I think that as you move into next week, things should be becoming increasingly clear, and it should be much easier to get things done. Libra. Libra, the moon continues to be in Gemini. The moon is in Gemini for most of the weekend, perhaps all of the weekend, depending on your time zone. And so with the moon in Gemini, I think that you are quite forward thinking. You want to be thinking about the future and what is possible in the future, and you don't want to restrict yourself to anything. I mean, I think that's really important to you. And as far as you're concerned, your real ambitions lie not right here, not right where you are. They perhaps lie over the next hill. So if your ambitions lie over the next hill, I suppose you have to move towards that hill, get to the top of it, be able to survey the land in front of you. So it's not a time when you should be staying in one place. But there are things trying to hold you back. The moon is making a square to Saturn. On Saturday, moon square Saturn. Moon makes a square to Saturn. And so on Saturday, you might feel that there are really rather unpleasant, not unpleasant in a sort of horrific way, but unpleasant in a sort of boring way, things that you just have to deal with, or you feel that you're expected to deal with them and you don't want to deal with them. And that is all rather annoying, and you kind of have to go through the motions, but not with particularly good grace. So if on Saturday you are feeling that things aren't going your way, that things are boring and you're doing things you shouldn't be doing, whatever, don't take it to heart, because what happens is the moon makes a square to Saturn, and then it moves on to make a conjunction to Jupiter, and that conjunction to Jupiter is very different. Moon-Jupiter conjunction is about possibilities. It's about a vision. It's about getting to the top of that hill and seeing all the things that are possible. So perhaps you should just confront that moon squared Saturn directly. Say to yourself, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this out of the way. I don't want to do it, but it's got to be done. Once you've got it done, then things really change. There are new possibilities, and that could be described by the conjunction between the moon and Jupiter. But we also do have a full moon, and that full moon is kind of suggesting to you that it's important not to ask too many questions, or to get completely caught up in conceptual detail. You might be thinking, well, does this make sense? Where should I be going? What should I be doing? And sort of being overwhelmed by it all. I think that's not a good idea. If you're going to ask questions, every question you ask has to be followed by progress. So if you ask a question because you are trying to delay something, well, that's not a useful question, is it? Because you're actually looking for an answer. You already decided what answer you're going to get. So handling the facts and being realistic about the facts is important. And the point about gathering knowledge is to expand your horizons. Knowledge is not about restricting your horizons, but it can very often be about restricting your horizons. Knowledge can be misused. Knowledge can be used to provide an excuse for doing nothing. Or there's some danger, Libra, that you might fish for knowledge. I mean, by that I mean you want confirmation. You want confirmation that your old approach is fine. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to reach a conclusion, perhaps even an inspiration, that you don't have to do anything. to be inspired that no action is required. Now, that's not healthy. You should be inspired to move forward. So, in terms of knowledge, if you're trying to gather knowledge today, you can't restrict yourself. You just have to allow the information to sort of come your way, left, right, and centre. I mean, over the weekend. Sorry, it's not about today, really. I mean, I know that the full moon is technically on. It's for most of us it's on. For most Librans, for most of us it's on Sunday. But you have to use knowledge in the right way, and it's not there to hold you back. It's not there to provide an excuse. So I think that is something important, and it's just important that you do use the full moon in the right way. And talking about the past, Venus, which is your ruler, is actually square true black moon Lilith. So Venus is at 9 Aquarius, true black moon Lilith is at 9 or 10 Scorpio. So that's something from the past that you might get distracted by, and it might unleash a set of feelings which may not always be entirely constructive. And so if you have a situation where you are thinking a lot about the past, you have strong feelings about the past, Libra, ask yourself whether you're really being taken in the right direction. Maybe you're just being encouraged to brood and to sort of have negative thoughts just for the sake of it, and that will just stop you in your tracks. So by all means, be aware and honest and open to what happened in the past, to some of your darker feelings. You don't want to hide anything, but don't let your darker feelings and perhaps recent darker experiences hold you back, because there is this Moon Jupiter conjunction, which is the nicest thing about today. And ideally, this Moon Jupiter conjunction should be propelling you forward and should be allowing you to understand what is possible. And if you haven't been making the most of your abilities and your creativity, and indeed if you haven't been following your true purpose and your true potential, then that Moon Jupiter is going to give you clues about what you need to do and what changes you need to make. So it is important with that Moon Jupiter conjunction that you maintain a positive and forward-thinking approach, and that you're ready to climb that hill, so that far hill, and just see what is in front of you, because a lot is in front of you if you can put yourself in the right position and open your eyes. Scorpio, it may feel that this weekend is somewhat complicated, but nothing is entirely straightforward. And I suppose, being a Scorpio, you may be tempted to make things actually more complicated than they really are. And it may be that you will want to overload yourself, almost deliberately overload yourself with information. And the function of this information is to just demonstrate to you what a difficult world you live in, and that really is possible, and that could really bring things to a halt. And so I would have said, don't take yourself too seriously, and don't overload yourself with too much information, because you might be overly negative about it, and it just might be an excuse for doing nothing. And we're reminded also that there is a full moon, and that full moon, I mean, it affects all of us. It certainly affects you, and I suppose this full moon is going to encourage you to make things complicated. Now, if you want to make things complicated, Scorpio, regardless of the problems and the risks, then I suppose, Scorpio, you have to ask yourself why. Why are you doing it? What is your purpose? Are you just doing it for the sake of it? Which, as a Scorpio, you might be. Or are you actually doing it because you maybe want to find something out? Because it's part of a process of discovery. And that's how it should be, a process of discovery. A process of discovery that works on all levels. It works on an outer level, trying to sort of understand what the world is like, what people are doing, what's happening in society. But it's also working on an inner level, what's happening to you, what are you experiencing. And I suppose that's a way to use it. Use this full moon. You kind of you dig deep in order to rise higher. And I suppose, you see it like foundations, isn't it? I mean, the taller the building you're trying to create, the deeper you have to make the foundations. And so I'm hoping, Scorpio, that your approach to this with this full moon is going to be quite foundational. You feel you have to discover things about yourself and the world around you in order to build for the future, and that would certainly be constructive. Now, this full moon, Scorpio, could very well have a financial dimension. It might be about seeing things for what they really are and seeing the financial motive. A lot of people are motivated by finance and money, and they're not obvious about it. They keep it to themselves, but you can start to see the motivations in terms of people and organizations and why people are behaving. People may try to explain themselves and their motives in a non-financial way, but deep down there is a financial agenda that maybe now you should start to be aware of. And in terms of your own money, just be open, be honest. Don't assume that things are straightforward, especially if other people are involved. In fact, for full moon, in terms of financial arrangements, agreements, contracts, full moon is going to shine light on a lot of things. And if anyone has been trying to pull the wool over your eyes, I think that now is a chance when you can start to really see the truth and really understand it. But don't be too cynical. I mean, it's easy to be cynical, to just focus on how bad human nature actually is. There's got to be something left. There's got to be some kernel of optimism there, some idea that you are moving forward and that there is a vision that goes beyond money, goes beyond sort of petty financial details. And you need to hold on to that vision. And I think if you do hold on to that vision, I think you'll start to see ways in which that vision can be realized. Sagittarius. So Sagittarius, this weekend is a full moon. And this full moon is in Gemini. That means that the full moon is across the main axis of your chart. Sun in Sagittarius, moon in Gemini. And every year we get this full moon. And this full moon does put some focus on your relationship to the outside world. The moon is in Gemini, and it gives you, I suppose, a certain sense of balance. You start to realize where your power ends and other people's power starts. You can never be in a situation where you have all the power or you have no power. There's always a balance. Of course, some different situations have different qualities. There may be certain situations in your life where you have very little power, other situations, other perhaps relationships where you have all the power. or at least 99% of the power, but you're never all-powerful and never completely powerless. And so this full moon could easily have an impact on relationships. And so if you're in a relationship with this full moon, you may start to see the relationship for what it really is. And you can start to understand its true nature. And it's always good to see the truth about someone. And this truth could be great. You may realize that someone is a real bonus for you, that your contacts with this other person are really working in your favor. On the other hand, the full moon may make you finally realize that a certain person or a certain situation is just doing you no good. The truth is out there, it's right in front of you. And so that could be how the full moon works. But it needn't be about people. It just could be just about a situation that you're in, something you're involved with, and you realize what its true nature is. And once you know what the true nature of something is, you have an opportunity to act. But knowledge is, of course, never the same as action, or very rarely the same as action. I mean, anyone who's experienced psychotherapy will, I think, realize this. I mean, the process of psychotherapy, you can understand a huge amount about yourself and how you came to be who you are, what happened in your early life that had a dramatic impact, and you have all this knowledge. Does it change anything? No. That's so often the case, isn't it? So with knowledge should come action in theory, but in practice very often not. But maybe you can break this trend, break this tendency, and use knowledge as a spur for action. And continuing on the theme of relationships, Moon is making a conjunction to Jupiter in Gemini, your opposite sign, and that suggests that you can gain a great deal from a particular relationship. And also, Mercury is coming to a standstill. Mercury rules Gemini. Mercury is very important for you in terms of relationships. So at the end of the weekend, sort of perhaps on Monday, it depends on your time zone, we've got a situation where Mercury stops being retrograde, starts going direct, and this might mean that a social situation, or perhaps a relationship situation, which seemed perhaps a little bit stuck, especially over the last few weeks, starts to resolve itself. Maybe someone is more ready to give you a decision and seems to be clearer. And so I think that will make things easier for yourself. So if someone has been disappointing you recently, or you haven't been able to work someone out, maybe things will change with Mercury going direct, and I think change for the better. Capricorn, this weekend we do have a full moon, and full moons in astrology are always important, and it will affect you as it affects everyone else. Now, this full moon may actually for you work on quite a psychological level. It could be about you starting to understand things that have been hidden, and now that they're being revealed, you can start working with them. I mean, you can't work on something if you can't see it, you don't know it, you don't understand it. That's just not possible at all. Yet, if it's right in front of you, it's in your hands, then you have got something to work on. And so with this full moon, you should be looking for clarity, and you should be trying to make sense of things. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be 100% easy. The problem is that we don't have any planets in Earth signs, except for Uranus. And Capricorn, you are an Earth sign. I think you appreciate Earth, and you're kind of asking, where is it? Where is this thing where I can't touch it? So if I can't touch it, how can I organize it? How can I make sense of it? And that might be slightly frustrating for you. But I think this full moon is actually providing answers. And just because you can't directly touch something doesn't mean you can't change it, doesn't mean you can't control it. And perhaps control has to start with your own mind. So mental clarity with this full moon for you, I think, is going to be really important. You don't want complications. You don't want confusion. You want to avoid people and situations that are just making a complicated situation even more complicated. And so, if you look for clarity, I think that it's something you can definitely find. And the full moon might give you clarity all at once. It just happens. And I think that you'll be helping yourself if you demand clarity. Because there is a square between Moon and Supermoon and Saturn on Saturday. Now, many people will find that Moon square Saturn difficult. I don't think you will. I think that you'll find it quite natural. And there may be a time on Saturday where you feel that you have to demand an answer. And it may relate to another person. Someone is not being entirely clear. They're not making their intentions clear. It may feel that they're hiding something. And you just have to say you want answers. And if you do ask for answers this weekend, especially on Saturday, I think that you will get those answers. And then with the full moon, there is a sense of clarity, and things that were perhaps hidden can now be revealed. And in a process, you can act in a way that is somewhat surprising. Other people may not be expecting it, but you do something that was not expected, and people hadn't planned for it, they hadn't worked it out, and that catches them unawares, and that does give you, I think, a fair amount of power. Aquarius, this weekend, as you know, there is a full moon, and I think that this full moon is relatively straightforward for you. It's not a complicated full moon, and I know some people are going to be more affected by it than others. I think all things being equal, you're probably going to be less affected, but it's still something that we do need to consider. So I think that this full moon is really asking you to be quite independent. And you're an Aquarius. Of course, independence is something that always is important to you. But I think with this full moon, it's especially important. And it's about a situation where there are things which really only you can do. I mean, other people can do them, but they can't do it as well as you. And it's not a time to be apologetic, to say, well, maybe what you're doing isn't good enough, or maybe it doesn't suit other people's tastes, maybe people don't appreciate it. You could apologize, you could say, oh, you're going to change it. That's not what this is about. This full moon is about you really embracing and understanding what you do well, and maybe even defending it. It's like with celebrity. Celebrity is this sort of interesting phenomena, and when you think about celebrity, you often think, don't you, that celebrities are, I mean, maybe you don't, I don't, but some people think that celebrities are somehow special. They've got some sort of unique talent. Okay, sure, that's true. Some celebrities do indeed have unique talents. But in order to be a celebrity, in most cases, you need to have, at some level, the ability to fit in. You have to fit in to other people's tastes. You have to be palatable. And in other words, you have to have a certain capacity to follow the crowd. Okay, you might need a certain spark. You may need to be a little bit of an extrovert. But of course, if you're an extroverts very often are aware of popular tastes, what they need to do at a particular time, and who they need to please. But that's not what you're about. That's not what this full moon is about. This full moon is the kind of the opposite of this. It's not a time to be a celebrity, is it? It's a time when you need to really concentrate on what makes you unique, what makes you special, the things you can do, and if you try to change what you do to fit outside tastes, to make yourself popular, well, you're destroying the very thing you're trying to achieve. And so I think the full moon is asking yourself to be unique, and perhaps it's giving you an awareness of what you need to do, and perhaps also how you manage outside pressure. I mean, I don't know about your situation, but it may be certain friends, associates, contacts are putting a little bit of pressure on you. You feel a certain sense in which you should be conforming, but I don't think you should be trying to conform. It's not a time for conforming. It's a time for being spontaneous and, not being self-conscious. If people think you're being an idiot or you're being irresponsible or being childish, so what? The point is you're being yourself, and that's what matters. And there may be times, particularly on Saturday, where you have your doubts. Perhaps you'll be worrying about the material implications of what you're doing. The moon is making a square to Saturn, but then the moon makes a conjunction to Jupiter. And just before the full moon, moon makes a conjunction to Jupiter, and that should make you feel, very positive about yourself. And then the full moon comes and you see the truth, and you see what you have to do, and what you have to do comes from yourself. It does not come from external expectations. Pisces, the full moon today does matter. It's across quite an important axis of your chart. It's across in the jargon, it's across the 10th house, 4th house axis. So the sun is in Sagittarius, so it's that sun in Sagittarius, it's in a very sort of high-profile part of the Pisces horoscope. But then you've got the moon in Gemini, and the moon in Gemini is kind of at the bottom of the chart. And so there is a certain dilemma there, or you feel that there is a tension. So you can feel the pressure to do things, to be out there in the world, perhaps to be in the public eye, or to be doing something that everyone can see, and perhaps conforming as well, conforming to what is expected of you. Now, that would especially be the case if you're working over the weekend. I don't know if you are working over the weekend. You might be retired, you might not have a job. It depends on the situation. But if you are working over the weekend, you're certainly aware of that pressure. But the full moon is asking you, I think, to put your own interests first, because it's a full moon in Gemini at the bottom of the chart. It's telling you that you can't have big ambitions unless you first sort out the basics. You sort out the fundamentals of who you are, and that might mean putting a lot of emphasis on your home or considering your family. And I think with moon in Gemini, moon conjunct Jupiter in Gemini, that's something that's important for you to do. But with this full moon, I think that you're going to perhaps become quite aware of the balance between, on one hand, your home and your family, and on the other hand, your outside obligations, whatever they might be. And you have to get that balance right. But I think at the moment with the moon in Gemini, if in doubt, the emphasis does need to be on home, family, whatever makes you feel secure. And it may mean that you have to be quite disciplined about it. Just before the full moon, the moon makes a square to Saturn, and that moon square Saturn, I actually don't think that's a problem, that moon square Saturn. I think that is about you being very clear about what you want and what you don't want, and perhaps laying down the law, and perhaps also making it clear where your boundaries start and making sure that no one crosses those boundaries. And another thing going on this weekend is we've got Mercury going stationary direct, and that happens right at the end of a weekend, perhaps into Monday, depending on your time zone. But with Mercury going stationary direct, I think that you may find that certain people are becoming more forthcoming. They perhaps have been holding something back, have been unwilling to make decisions over the last few weeks. They haven't been clear about who they are and what they want. But I think now they're becoming clearer. And perhaps if you're waiting for something or someone to make a decision, the decision might be about to be made. And so that could provide some clarity for you. And now it's time to look at the weekend from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend of December the 14th and 15th going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 20. In fact, it was the only hexagram I got. Didn't move. And so when you've got no moving lines, that indicates that not a great deal is going to be going on. And then we have hexagram 20, which is, in a way, one of the most passive hexagrams. It really does not suggest movement in itself. It kind of gives us an idea of a solid structure, and it's just about contemplating, working things out. It's not a time for action. It is a time for observation, and just watching things. And the I Ching says the ablution has been made, but not the offering or the sacrifice or whatever. So we've kind of got ready for something, but we haven't gone through with it. We are waiting. And that's the way it should be. And I suppose that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? If you think about what's happening astrologically, we've got a full moon. Full moon it's a stressful time when we can see things. I mean, full moons are about observation. They are about watching things, seeing the reality of things. That's the full moon. Should we take action? Perhaps not immediately. We should wait to see how things pan out. Also, Mercury is going stationary direct, but it doesn't go direct technically until right at the end of a weekend, or even into Monday if you're in sort of parts of Asia, Australia, New Zealand. So things are up in the air. So that's all the more reason not to do anything and just to work out what's going on. So, don't be in a hurry. Be patient. You start the weekend. You don't have all the facts. So just wait. Let the facts gather. Remember, it's a full moon in Gemini we've got this weekend. Gemini is about facts, gathering those facts. Then we can start to make our decision. Even then, we might not feel that we have to do anything. Remember, the moon is about to move from being waxing to waning. The last half of the moon can often be a time when we shouldn't necessarily do anything. Now there is a nuclear hexagram here. You know, when we don't have any moving lines, it's the nuclear hexagram can give us a little more information, and at least in my opinion. And the nuclear hexagram, you know, if we knock out the top and the bottom line, so we look at the 4 lines in the middle, the nuclear hexagram is splitting apart. And it is a difficult hexagram, splitting apart. Everything is falling apart. The powers of evil are in their ascendancy. That's not saying that that's not what's happening. This is only the nuclear hexagram. But it gives us an idea about the background. And so perhaps the reason we are in a state of contemplation is simply because things have happened recently. Not just to us, but all around us. And it may have felt that things were splitting apart, disintegrating, and they've gone as far as they can get. It's all chaos. Things are a mess, and many people are going to have to pick up the pieces. But this is talking about something you know already. I'm not making any forecasts about splitting apart. It's just about the background. And that's perhaps what we're contemplating. We're perhaps contemplating the past, and it has been a difficult situation. Again, not necessarily for us, just perhaps for the world in which we're living. And now we must start perhaps getting ready for actually taking action, but we're not ready for it yet. And so that falls back to this idea of contemplation. We don't have the facts at the moment. We don't have the perception. We don't have the objectivity, and that's perhaps how we should leave it. And the big event this weekend is, of course, the full moon. And let's look at the full moon. And it's a full moon in Gemini. And so here is the chart of the full moon. And this full moon is it's in Gemini. So I suppose I have to start by just talking about the general theme of a full moon. A full moon is moving from being waxing to waning. We're in a cycle that has peaked, that is peaking, and after the full moon, the moon in the sky as you see it is going to get smaller and smaller. So all things being equal, it's the dark side of the cycle is about to start. Perhaps the malefic side of the cycle. I mean, some people might take objection to saying that the waxing moon is benefic, the waning moon is malefic, but it's an important part of the tradition, East and West, to see the waning moon as being malefic. And I believe in Vedic astrology, when you judge the moon in a chart, you do need to consider whether it's waxing or waning, and all things being equal, a waning moon is going to be less fortunate than a waxing moon. So, my moon, for example, I'm born on a waning moon. I suppose you could see that, I don't know, in a karmic sense, lifetimes. If you believe in that kind of stuff, maybe I'm moving towards the end of a series of incarnations and I'm having to start to contemplate the next series. I don't know, however you want to look at it. Dane Rudger wrote a book on the lunation cycle that you might be interested in. I think I assume you can still get a hold of it. And so what does this particular full moon mean? Well, one thing we can straight away notice about this full moon, that it is very linked up with Venus. I notice it at least. The thing is that Venus is semi-square the Sun, and Venus is sesquiquadrate the Moon. That means that the Sun-Moon midpoint is sort of 23 Pisces, 23 Virgo, so Venus is going to be making a semi-square to the Sun-Moon midpoint, or the sesquiquadrate to the Sun-Moon midpoint. In other words, Venus is on the Sun-Moon midpoint. And actually that is quite positive. Venus on the Sun Moon midpoint. It can be a new moon, a full moon, which is about relationships and how we relate to people. And in a positive sense, it can be a full moon which can strengthen relationships and can perhaps make it clear that relationships are perhaps important. Relationships at all levels, not necessarily just romantic relationships, but relationships on all levels are going to be important with Venus on the Sun Moon midpoint. And maybe we're going to have high expectations of relationships. We're going to want things from relationships. We're going to want to be part of something. So that is a way in which Venus on the Sun Moon midpoint could work. We're going to perhaps have high expectations. So if you're involved in a relationship, you're going to want to perhaps a lot from your partner over the next couple of weeks, because the full moon is going to last for at least 2 weeks. So that's one possibility. Venus is a sort of planet of war, isn't it? I mean, in a way, I kind of regard Venus as being the sort of planet of victory, and I suppose connected with the Greek god Nike. And so with the full moon, we see the implications of victory. Perhaps it's about having a success. There's been a success. Maybe it's a success where we're a winner, someone else is a loser. And now we see its implications. Is it such a good thing? And of course, we also see that in a global sense. For example, Assad has been defeated. Many people are very happy about it. He's gone. He's gone to Moscow. Now what? What are the consequences of that victory? And that full moon is perhaps telling us these are the consequences. And as I said, as I was looking at the news before I started recording, the Kurdish fighters or the Kurds in Syria, they're not. They can't put so much effort into fighting ISIS anymore because they've got to worry about Turkish-backed militias. Where's this all leading? I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? So as far as the structure of this full moon, I think it's always important when you've got a full moon to look at it from a midpoint perspective. By the way, I mean, I think from an external perspective, I am not convinced that it is a super dramatic full moon. And I would have said that the most important aspect that I can see by eye without looking at the midpoints is the semi-sextile quincunx with Uranus. So we've got Sun quincunx Uranus, we've got Moon semi-sextile Uranus. So Uranus does touch this full moon. And Uranus is about revolutions, it's about uncertainty, it's about things happening, and it suggests that this full moon is not a particularly stabilizing full moon. I'm not saying it's a super dramatic full moon, though. It's not like the new moon is right on Uranus, conjunct or opposition it, but it is a little bit destabilizing there with that Uranus. And yeah, it's always good to look at the midpoints and look at the underlying structure of the full moon. And so if we use a 30-degree dial, in other words, we put planets where they are in the sign. So this full moon, if we start with 0 here, this full moon is at 23-24 Gemini Sagittarius, so it goes to 23-24, and Uranus is also at 23-24. So that means on the 30-degree dial, you actually see that the moon is, the sun and the moon are conjunct Uranus. So that does give you a certain sense of it, and it's kind of making an aspect to the Mars-Saturn midpoint. But it's a 30-degree dial, it's not particularly dynamic. So I wouldn't worry too much about Uranus making an aspect of a Mars-Saturn midpoint on the 30-degree dial. It's probably more important to look at the 45-degree dial. the 45-degree dial, which looks at conjunctions, oppositions, squares, semi-squares, sesquiquadrates, and so, or rather the 90-degree dial. Yes. So here's the full moon on a 90-degree dial. Remember, 90-degree dial shows oppositions as conjunctions. That's why we have a conjunction there. So the full moon, this full moon is on the Hades Admetos midpoint, if you're using the hypothetical planets. So Hades and Admetos in Uranian astrology, Hades are quite difficult. Hades is a planet of death, of criminality, of garbage, of disgust. Hades, Admetos, is a planet of delay. Admetos mythologically delayed his own death, and so when you put a Hades and Admetos together, there is a sense of growing decay, a feeling that things are not really developing as they should be, and it could be just a sense that there is some kind of destruction going on, but there is delay here. People are trying to perhaps delay the inevitable, and that might be a certain sense about what's happening with this full moon. I'm not saying that it's necessarily about you, what's going on in your life, but we may notice this, that some people are deluding themselves with this full moon. They think that things can be put on hold, that if you leave things long enough, things will get better, and the implication here is, well, maybe that's not the case. And in fact, this full moon, remember I said that Venus is on the Sun-Moon midpoint. We can see Venus is opposition Sun-Moon, the Sun-Moon. That's because Venus is semi-square the Sun and the Moon. So that means it becomes an opposition. So Venus and the Sun and the Moon, they're on the Hades Admetos midpoint, and so that Venus, that may relate to certain relationships. I mean, relationships are an important feature of this full moon, but perhaps because of the influence of Hades and Admetos, in certain situations, we may be involved in a relationship that really is going nowhere, that it's in a state of decay, but perhaps we can't bring ourselves to end it. And I'm not necessarily talking about any kind of long-term permanent relationship. It may be just with a relationship with someone you've had just for a few days or weeks. Maybe it's got nothing to do with love or romance. It's got some other purpose, but perhaps just some relationship you are involved in is really going nowhere. It's going nowhere. The full moon is showing you that it's going nowhere, but perhaps there's a sense in which you're just sort of hanging on to it. So that is a possible manifestation of this full moon. But I must emphasize, I don't think that this is a particularly strong, powerful full moon. I must emphasize this. Now, as far as different places in the world that might be impacted by the full moon, so I did just quickly do some astrocartography. I'm not promising I'm going to find anything special. So looking at the map of the world, well, there's the full moon. These are all, see this yellow line? This is all the places where the sun is conjunct the ascendant and the moon is conjunct the descendant. So you can see that it goes through Brazil and goes through Argentina, goes relatively close to Buenos Aires, and so it may be in terms of certain parts of South America, maybe Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina. I think it might have an impact. I mean, it's not exactly on the ascendant in Buenos Aires, but I mean, I know that Javier Milei, he's got his issues. He's trying to work things out in Argentina, but there may be things going on in South America. I mean, I know that's such a broad massive part of the world, and that sounds pretty vague, but that's something that the astrocartography does seem to highlight. And I will look at the Middle East. I will set this chart for Damascus just to see if we see anything. Now, on the other side of the world, you've got parts of the world where the moon is conjunct the ascendant and the sun is conjunct the descendant. As you can see, the yellow line coming in here, and it goes through eastern China and goes through Sydney and Canberra. So it's, and I know people are watching this from Australia, it may have an impact on that, on eastern Australia, and I suppose it goes through the largest the main city in Australia, Sydney, and it also goes pretty close to the capital of Australia, Canberra. So that might be a place to watch out for. And so let me just set that full moon for so this is a full moon set for Canberra. And as I say, when I talked about the horoscope of Anthony Albanese recently. I think he's got his Mars return. Must make it clear, I know nothing about Australian politics, so you'll have to fill in the blanks. So that full moon set for Canberra is, you've got moon rising, moon right on the ascendant, you've got the sun on the descendant. So that full moon, remember that full moon is on the Hades Admetos midpoint, so that's perhaps something to consider. So it may say something about the political situation in Australia. Again, I don't know anything about it. I do know that Anthony Albanese does have a Mars return, and I think there's been, I was told there are sort of, I was looking at the comments. Someone, I was told there have been well, aside from the plane tickets, there's been issues with anti-Semitism. I was looking at a comment by Lisa Michelle, who I think is in Australia. She made a comment there that something he had to deal with. There are certain disturbances connected with anti-Semitism. I don't know, but that might be some of the issues that have to be dealt with, or it could be just something new, something you don't know about. So if you are in Australia, just do consider how that full moon might affect your country. And I suppose we do have to consider the Middle East. And here's the full moon set for Damascus. And I mean, it's nothing exact here, but you can. I mean, we already know that Syria is a part of the world which is highly tense. So maybe the sun and the moon do not have to be exactly on the midheaven set for Damascus. Full moon on the midheaven, issues about government. We knew that already. We've got Saturn on the ascendant, and so it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, it's really difficult, and I think that it could be Syria is going to be affected, but it's nothing we don't already know. But if you actually do the astrocartography for the Middle East, you can actually be a little more specific. So let's go back to the maps, and so this time I want to look at Western Asia. It just says, well, what I want is the Middle East. I'm hoping that, so it seems to me that that it is it's the east of the country that really gets affected. So maybe we should actually be looking at maybe Iraq instead of, let's look at Iraq. And so here is So you can see this is the Middle East. So it's not actually very clear here what's happening. But I think that this is Iran, and this is Iraq, and you can see that this full moon actually goes right through Iraq, and so you're going to have the sun exactly on the midheaven in Iraq. You're going to have moon exactly on the IC, and we've just heard that ISIS are active again. People are taking advantage of what's going on in Syria. So it may be that this full moon brings something out in terms of the Middle East. Could affect Syria, could affect Iraq. And so it's something that people hadn't realized. And remember that this full moon is on Venus, and Venus is the planet of victory. And with this full moon, and perhaps in the last half of December, people will start to become aware of, what the full implications of the fall of Assad really are. So I suppose I should say something else about this full moon. This full moon happens at the same time as Mercury goes stationary direct. And very often when you have this happening, you get some market disturbance. So this is happening over the weekend. So late weekend, we got Mercury going stationary direct at the same time as a full moon, and so that can impact the markets. Remember, I don't give financial advice. I'm not saying which way the markets are going. I'm just pointing it out that it can cause market turbulence. May not this time around, but we would always look at what is happening. I mean, as far as I can see, nothing too dramatic is going on in the markets as we move into the weekend. But it will be interesting to see what happens on Monday, given the fact that we have got full moon and Mercury direct happening at the same time. And markets aside, when you've got a full moon and Mercury going direct at the same time, it's just a total trend change. We've got two trends changing: waxing moon to waning moon, Mercury retrograde to Mercury direct, all happening at the same time. So that can be quite dramatic. It's two forces coming together at the same time. Yeah, we might feel that. And when you look at the world now, because I'm recording this actually on a Friday morning Pacific time, it may be different from when you look at the world, say early next week. And finally, let's consider someone who's impacted by this. Donald Trump is impacted by this full moon, by the way, because his sun is at 22 Gemini. So sun at 22 Gemini, so it's kind of an inverted full moon. Because this full moon is happening almost exactly 6 months after his birthday. He was 78, his last birthday. So in fact, you could say it's kind of his 6-monthly return. And so you could do that. If there is a technique, there is an approach. Let me just show you what I mean. So if we take Donald Trump's chart, let me show you. So here's Donald Trump's chart, June the 14th, 1946. So he's coming up for his half birthday. And what you can actually do is you can create a demi-solar return, a solar return for half the year. So this is when the sun doesn't return to the conjunction of his sun, but when the sun returns to the opposition of his sun. And this program does allow me to calculate his demi-solar return. So it has a feature for a demi-return. So I just enter the fact that I want an 180-degree angle rather than a 0 degrees angle. So here's his demi-return set for where he was born, and so we can see that his demi-return kind of has a full moon, but it's not a very exact full moon, and so there is. I'm not going to try to really interpret this. I would have said perhaps with Saturn on the IC in his demi-return, it's not as important as the solar return, but things aren't entirely easy with Saturn on the IC. There are things he has to deal with. There are things that may be sort of frustrating for him, and the moon is in the 7th, so he's got to, he's got to watch out for his enemies. I mean, I know he's just been named Time Person of the Year, but still, I think the demi-return may indicate that there are going to be a few frustrations for him. But I don't want to make a big thing about it. I don't use demi-returns very often, so but it is an astrological technique. One person who may be affected by this full moon is the German Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock. I do quite often look at her chart. Remember, she's supposed to be a green, and she is a complete neocon warhawk. She's a total advocate for NATO's war against Ukraine, and I don't understand. I thought Greens were into peace, but she's absolutely not into peace. She supports this war. She supports sending German munitions to Ukraine. I don't know what's going on, but clearly this is a very dangerous woman. Although I believe she's not very popular in Germany. The Greens are doing very badly in Germany. You've got federal elections coming up. It's unlikely that she's going to be foreign minister for much longer. And it is her birthday. So I suppose we have to say happy birthday, Annalena Baerbock, whatever we think about her. And she's going to be 44. And so she's got a full moon on her birthday. So here is, I don't have a time of birth, which is annoying. But here is her solar return, approximately. Again, I don't have a time of birth. So she has a full moon on her solar return. So it's a time of realization for her. Perhaps realizing that her political career is over, that the Greens are going to do really badly, that Russia's going to win one way or another, that the world has changed now that Trump has won. So that may say something about her. I mean, I know that it's the same for lots of people in German government, but it seems to affect her perhaps more than others. So so perhaps we need to watch Annalena Baerbock over the next couple of weeks following her birthday. There may be a certain craziness to her, desperate to cause as much damage as she can, while her political career is still operational, while she's still foreign minister. So, those are a few thoughts about her. Anyway, that's all as far as this full moon is concerned. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you again very soon.